mode.
Good afternoon and welcome to the CAD1 Revit Adaptive Components webinar today. And we saw many of you on Revit Radio just a little bit ago, but this is our more serious version of a webinar. And so anyway, I have with me today, as always, Brian Mackey of BD Mackey Consulting, and nationally known Revit blogger and consultant, just back from Autodesk University. So welcome, Brian, and my name's Stan Henney, the Business Development Manager here at CAD1. So anyway, a lot of familiar names, some new ones on our webinar today. Go through the housekeeping. Oh, you did change out your slide. If you want to switch between mic and speakers in the telephone, you can do that on the control panel. Most of you have done this before. If you want to minimize the console, get it out of the way so you can see the entire screen. You hit the orange arrow. You can raise your hand, and which is always a mystery to us. But anyway, you can also, and most importantly, type in your questions. And if you type in your questions, we will try to answer them as closely as in context as we can. So,
and feel free to type those questions in during as we're getting into it and during the webcast. You don't have to wait till the end. We're going to answer them as we go through if they make sense, because it's always tough to go back to remember what you were presenting earlier.
So Brian, I'll let you kind of hit the high points of what you're going to talk about today, and we'll get started.
So last month's webcast I talked about doing massing. So now we're going to start getting into Revit adaptive components. There's a lot of differences in the Revit adaptive components. There's actually two types of adaptive components. The ones that are obviously called adaptive generic model. The other one is generic model pattern based. That is more to be associated to a curtain, a divided mass. What's great about the pattern-based family is we can also use it similar to an adaptive component. So we're going to talk a little bit about the differences of that. Why use reference planes? What are these reference points in the adaptive/massing families? And also then how can we start adding parameters, reporting parameters, and really get those using them into a project. I'm going to start with a pretty basic example of really getting into just adaptive components, how they can be used in this webcast. I think we have one coming up in the next few months where we'll get a little bit more advanced and getting into some reactors and things like that in the family. So with that said, I think we'll just go ahead.
Let me just go ahead and mention that we will be recording this today, and if we're successful at it, sometimes we screw it up and sometimes we get it right. So hopefully, but we're getting better at it. So this will be recorded, and Brian, I think I always ask you this, and then I should know the answer by now, but are you putting these recordings on your site?
I am not putting on my site. CAD1 has a YouTube called CAD1 Presents, and if you go Google it on CAD1 Presents, it's usually pretty well.
And you can also find it, linked to it on our CAD1.com website under the events page, and then archived emails. So either way, you can watch it again if you so choose.
So I'm going to pretty much, starting with an out-of-the-box Revit file, I want to jump into just creating a very simple, basic adaptive family so you can kind of understand what's going on and how this is working. And it's going to be similar to the conceptual mass family with some of the tools and references we have and just the overall feel of what's going on. So I'm going to start a new family. I'm going to go do a generic model adaptive. And like I was saying, you will have generic model adaptive, and there's also a generic model pattern-based. We'll get into the pattern-based in a little bit so you can kind of see the similarities to them. But I'm just going to start with my generic model adaptive. So when we get into this, typical to like any other family in Revit, you are going to have two reference planes. However, with adaptive component families and getting into those other scenarios, it really doesn't matter that that's set for defines origin or not, because we're really not going to be using the reference planes as much inside of adaptive components. We're really going to more get into adaptive lines and adaptive points. So, reference lines and adaptive points. I don't use a whole lot of reference planes that often unless I'm doing very simplistic things, and I do that more in the massing environment.
Let me ask you, Victor made the comment that the audio is breaking up a little bit. I moved the mic over, and hopefully that's a little better. Can you just hit your raise your hand button so that we can see if you're hearing the webcast okay here?
I do have to say that's probably the first time somebody ever told me that I was breaking up and I wasn't loud enough. I don't think I've ever been told in my life I wasn't loud enough. So
looks like everybody's hearing it okay. So we'll assume that everything's going all right. So let us know if you have any problems with the audio.
So when we start getting into adaptive families, what we're really going to be wanting to do is start using points or adaptive points to really use and take the benefit of getting into this file. So you're going to see that in this environment, very similar to what I was showing with massing in last month's webcast, I've got the reference points and I've got all these little draw tools. There are a couple different draw tools in the massing/adaptive families. We got point elements, and we've also got what are called splines through points. So a couple different little tools inside of here, and I'm just going to start off by doing reference, and I'm going to do reference points. And I'm just going to come down on the screen. I want to make sure I'm not hooked up to the reference plane. I must have had that selected before I went into there. I'm going to just do these on the reference level. It really doesn't matter, but for ease of this, I'm going to get ahead and do it on the reference level. And then I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to place 4 points for right now. Now, once you place these 4 points, what we can start doing is getting into is if you select the point, that's just right now what's called a reference point. It's going to have a reference to it, but when I load it into a project, I really want to start making it using adaptive points. So you notice that if you select a reference point, you can come up in your contextual ribbon and say you want to make that adaptive. I'm going to go ahead and just select all 4 of those points on the screen, and I'm going to go make all 4 of those points adaptive. Once you make that point adaptive, it does have a slightly different graphics to it because of the properties, but a normal point can look similar to this. But the big difference is you are going to see there's numbers after those points. So I have 1, 2, 3, and 4. Those came up with the way I placed them on the screen. So the first point I picked became 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. If you don't like that, you're like, oh man, I really wanted this to be point 2, you'll notice I can change this to be point 2, and then it switches what was 2 to be point 4, etc. So if you don't like what's going on inside of here, you can always click these. And unlike other things in the Revit world, like grid lines, reference planes with names, it's not going to say, hey, enter a unique name. It just starts changing the numbers around for you. So in this case, it doesn't really matter what I'm doing with the points. I'm just kind of going to get here and set those points up. Now, those points are drawn and created. I need to create a surface or something off of this. And what you're going to find in the adaptive component families and the generic adaptive panel-based families is the fact that it's really critical you start paying attention to the work planes. So when you start using points and placing points down, I'll zoom into this, but it doesn't really help because it stays scaled on the screen. But you are going to notice that that object actually has inside of there all these different planes. So each adaptive point has a work plane in the X, Y, and Z areas. So I can have an X work plane, a Y work plane, a Z work plane, as well as just the point itself becomes an area to use and get into on this. So the reason I'm talking about that is I'm going to come in here and I want to basically connect the dots. I'm going to go back to my childhood days of doing a connect the dot. I also connect the dots in the order they're done. It's not really a critical thing that you have to do, but I just kind of in Revit figure if it's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, I should kind of follow that path. So I'm just going to come in here and draw some reference lines. And I'm going to make sure my 3D snapping is turned on. And this is what becomes critical in the adaptive components, is if I don't have my 3D snapping turned on, then I don't have the capability to snap to that object. It'll look like you're snapping to the object. You'll be like, oh, hey, okay, cool, I'm doing this, but it's still going to be associated to the reference level. So I'm going to make sure that 3D snapping is turned on, and I'm going to come through here, and I'm just going to go from point 1 to point 2, and then to point 3 to point 4, and I'm going to go back to point 1. So basically, I've just created this nice loop of lines going through here. I did this as reference lines, but you also could have done it as model lines. And I'm going to show you why I do it as reference lines here in a minute as opposed to model lines, and I'll go back and redo it as model lines so you guys can get the gist of it. But when I do this, I've now got these points on here, and you'll see, and the way I always check it is if I select a point and I move it, I want to make sure that those reference lines are going with it. So I'm always going to kind of come through here to make sure, did I do it the right way? Is it selected? Everything what I needed to do? I'm going to just grab a point or two and make sure those planes are going through. Now what's cool about this is in the massing/adaptive environment, I can actually just select this, and unlike normal Revit environment, I'd have to use a tab key to grab the chains of those reference lines. In the massing/adaptive environment, I don't have to. I can just simply select them, come up here now and say create form. And Revit's going to ask me, what kind of form do you want to create? Did you want to create a solid in this case, or did you just simply want to create a surface? And in this case, I'm just going to go create a very simple surface. And now I've got this surface created. That surface was created from those reference lines. And you'll see that if I select the surface and go hide it with my sunglasses, that what happens inside of here is those reference lines are still there. So I'm going to undo that real quick, and I'm just going to delete that surface, or I'm going to undo out of the surface. And I'm going to delete those reference lines because I want to show you the difference if you use if you use model lines. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go grab model lines, make sure 3D snapping is turned on. I'm going to say go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 and back to 1. And what you're going to notice that once I do that, it all looks fairly similar. I've got the model lines there, etc. I can come back and select again, just single click to select the chain of model lines. But now when I go say create form, what's kind of a drag, oh, that actually I don't think it did it in adaptive. That's right, in adaptive it switches up. But when you start getting to massing and stuff, and I talked about this last month, sometimes those model lines will get absolved into the family. So I can't go back to the beginning and have model lines sitting there, so I don't want to make changes or anything. It kind of becomes a pain. So I always use reference lines, but I forgot in the adaptive family, not true in the massing family, those get added to it. So great, I've got this 4-point family. Really, what good is this to do? So I'm just going to go start a new project. So I'm going to go create a new project. I'm just going to use the out-of-the-box architectural template. Pretty much any template would work. It's not like a big deal for what's going on inside of here. And just for my intents and purposes, I'm going to draw a quick wall in here. I'm going to go to my 3D environment, and I'm going to go ahead and load this family into here. So if you're in the 3D environment, now that this is an adaptive component, notice how when I'm sitting here, it's allowing me to see that face. But if I come over here, it's allowing me to see the placement plane or the level that happens to be set up. You'll also see with adaptive components, when you get into there, you've got the different levels. So I can say no, place this point on level 1, level 2, level 3, or like you saw me doing earlier, I could host it up on the face. So with something like this, I can come down here and place this on the ground, and maybe I want this just to be randomly somewhere on the face of the wall, and maybe I want this point up here to be on the edge of the wall, and then last but not least, maybe I want this 4th point to be up on level 2. And this is just total arbitrary craziness I'm doing here. But as you can see, and you get into it, that's that adaptive component I've just done. So now when I come in here and grab this and start looking at it, I'll go change my view to be shaded. You can start to see that I've taken that 4-point family and I can pick and host it anywhere I want to do. If I go move level 1 or level 2 up or down, this point's going to go with it. If I take this wall and change the height of this wall, if it was connected to the level, it would move up and down as well. So I'll just change the height of the wall because it's unconnected. And what you'll see is that adaptive point is hosted to the edge of that wall, so it's going to move with it. Again, if I come in here and grab this wall and just simply move its location, those adaptive points are going to be set there and going with it. So it's a really nice tool to be able to go through and just start coming out and saying, okay, I just want to have this adaptive component. I've actually used a very similar adaptive component similar to this because I was working with somebody who was trying to create like a curved roof structure. So we were able to go through and just pick some points on the ground. I think it was more similar to, we'll just delete that and do it again. It was similar to just going like, okay, we're going to have a point that's going to be at the edge of this wall. So we'll leave it on place on face. And so it was like at the edge of this wall, we'll go back to level 1. There was a point out here. Then there was a point on that corner. And then there was a point, come on, find the center of that wall. Can't get it to grab it. Trying to get the edge of that wall, and I think I missed it. Yes, I did. I figured I did. So let me rehost that point. So what it was is we were trying to create this canvas type environment. I think it was around some cabanas. So if you miss the point, this is something that's also great about this. When you come back, you can actually see that those points are still there. If I grab the family, you can't really get to the points. People try to grab the point and do this, and that's basically moving the entire family around, which is not what I was looking for. But what you can do is just simply grab that point, and now you've got pick a new host. So if you missed it on a host, you can just say pick a new point. And I'm going to say I want to pick what's going on. Don't know why I'm having issues with this now. We'll pick it here, and we'll put it up at the top of that. So now I've taken that, and it's on those 3 corners of the wall, and I've also done this up here. So maybe you're getting into a canvas-type construction or anything like that as well. These adaptive points could really start to be beneficial for you. So that's great. You might not be needing that. Let's talk about something a little bit more practical. And the one that I really like to use this on is when I'm getting into crickets. So I use adaptive components on crickets quite often. So I'm just going to go ahead and model a simple little roof. And I guess I should probably actually set my work plane to be level 1 again since I've messed with it. So I'm going to go ahead and model a roof in this view. I'll just leave it down on level 1. And it's going to be an extremely simple roof just to get this point across. And I'm just going to have 2 slopes in this roof, so I'll turn those off. And I'm going to say this roof is sloping, I don't know, a -1/2 inch. We'll finish that roof. So there's my sloping roof. Well, now let's go through and start to do a family that's going to be a little bit different and set up on this. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to create a new adaptive component family. So pretty much going to do the same thing that I did before, but I want to add a little bit of formulas to this and I want to make it a little bit better. So I'm going to go do some more reference points, and I'm going to still simply do a 4-point family. I'm going to go model my reference lines between there, but actually I need to go make those adaptive first. So let me go grab these 4 points, make these points adaptive. But what I'm going to want to do is be able to have a ridge line on this object. So what I want to do is I want to host something to that point too. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to go do another reference point. I'm not going to make this one set there, but right now you're going to see it looks like I'm snapping to this, but it's because I'm set for reference level. I don't want this on the reference level. And again, this is kind of the key when you get into adaptive families, is making sure everything you do is associated to the correct work plane. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my work plane to be the horizontal or the Z work plane on point 2, and then I'm going to place this point right there on point 2. What that allows me to do now is when I grab this point, that point has a value for offset. So now I can just use the offset value and say, hey, this is going to be 4 feet above, 4 feet below, etc. What's great about that is that whatever this point does, that other point starts going along for the ride. So I can move this over, I can move this down, I can really start to do anything I want to do at that point, and that other point's going to go along for the ride. So what I'm going to do now is go connect all of this with reference lines again. I'm going to make sure my 3D snapping's turned on, and in this case, 3D snapping chain, I'm going to go say just leave this on the reference level and then pick this point. So I'm going to go from point 1 to this regular point that I put up here. And I am having some issues today.
Not just with picking.
There we go. My issue was I was set on work plane, not set draw on face. So that makes life a big difference. I'm going to go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, back to 1, and then I'm just going to leave it at that for right now. So again, I'm just going to do the same thing, grab these reference planes, say create form. I'm just looking for doing a surface right now, and you can see that it's actually going to kind of create this warping surface off of those points. Okay? But I want to be able to control how high this is going to be when I load it into a project. So on that offset value, rather than just plugging a value, I'm going to hit my secret little hidden mapping button, and I'm going to go ahead and map that to a parameter, and I'm just going to call it offset.
Where was your secret mapping button?
My secret hidden mapping button, I'm going to make that instance. It's just this little squares that we see over here in the properties.
Just in case you missed it.
So now I've got an offset value to that, so I can come in here to properties and be like, oh no, I wanted that to be 6 feet, apply it, and you can see that point's going to be going up. So now what's cool about this is I'm going to take this and load it into my project. Now when I go to place this, I'm going to go ahead and say I'm placing it on a face, and I'm going to grab this work plane, I'm going to grab the edge there, and let's just say the midpoint's going to be there, we're going to be somewhere up here and again over here. What's nice about that is now I can grab that that object, and I did make that a type. I should have made it instance base. We'll fix it next time we're in the family. Go say 10 feet, and notice how that's offsetting 10 feet. But wait, what's going on here? I've got some sort of craziness where it's offsetting it way the heck over here. So the big thing else to know about adaptive components are all the properties that they bring. So all these adaptive points, I've got tons of different properties over here. One of those properties that I actually have is what is the orientation of all of these points going to be. And again, I'm going to go back and grab all the points and do it at the same time. But I can come in here, and so now the orientation is saying, hey, I'm going to put these in by the host reference. So in that case, when I was grabbing on the roof, the edge of the roof might have been the host I was dealing with. So it's going to go 10 feet sideways, not 10 feet vertically. So what I can do is change it to one of the other values. In this case, I'm just going to say, hey, let's place it vertical on placement. I'll go ahead and load that back into the project. Before I do, I'm going to change my height value or my offset value to be instance-based, so I don't have to keep going to type properties. And I'll go ahead and load this into my project. I'll tell it to overwrite, and boom, instantly you can see that since I said go vertical, it's going to go vertical, not some sort of craziness depending on how I hosted it. So when I picked those points, I might have been picking those points on the edge of the surface as opposed to the top, or vice versa. On this one, it might have been on this surface, so it just depends on what's going on and how you pick those. So now you can see, okay, not really a cricket what I was thinking about, so let's go back and break this family yet again. So I'm going to delete the surface, and rather than doing that as one thing, I'm just going to simply go draw another reference line, and I'm going to go make sure I'm on a face, and I got 3D snapping. Guess I don't need chain turned on. I'm going to go from point 1, and notice, or point 4, excuse me, and I'm always paying attention to my status bar in the lower left corner. So that way down in my lower left corner, it's telling me I'm on the point, not the end of the other reference line, etc. I'm going to come back up here to this point. It's going to tell me that's the reference point. So now I can do this more cricket-like and kind of grab these portions of it and say create form. And then I'll come over here and grab the portions here. Okay, that's getting in my way. And grab this and say create form. So as opposed to doing it as just one single roof, I'm going to go ahead, or one single surface, I'm going to go ahead and do it as multiple surfaces. So I'm going to come down here, do that, load this back into my project, say okay, overwrite the existing, and now you're going to see, okay, looking a little bit more cricket-like, I can actually come through here, start setting this up, and really get those going on inside of there. But I want to be able to control this a little bit more. I don't want to be able to just arbitrarily come in here and say, hey, that's got a 6-foot offset or a 10-foot offset or anything like that. What I really want to be able to do is start embedding some intelligence into this. So I'm going to go draw yet another reference line from point 2 to point 4. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually set my work plane on this point. So I'm going to go up to my set tool, and I'm going to set my work plane to be on this horizontal reference line. So similar to points, reference lines have an x-axis, a y-axis, and then 2 axes on the end as well. So I've got one, lengthwise of it, vertical or horizontal, and I've also got work planes on the end. So I'm going to make sure I go set that to be my work plane. Now I'm going to do a dimension, and again, I'm going to make sure this dimension I'm doing is going from an adaptive point to an adaptive point, not to the surface on the adaptive point. So that's the adaptive placement point reference, but I truly want to go from the adaptive point. So see how it's highlighting the point there, and I'm highlighting the point there, and I'm going to add a dimension here. Right, so if I grab this point just to verify it's working, I move the point, this dimension's updating, I move it up and down, the dimension's still updating, so everything's still working for me. But what I want to do is label this now as basically like the run of my file. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to label this parameter. I'm going to call this one the run. I'll make it instance-based as well. But what I want to do is make this a reporting parameter. So I don't want to have to plug that value in. I want it to report back to me what that value is going to be depending on where I place either of those points. Okay, so now I've got this run value, I've got an offset value programmed into that. We're going to come in here and start saying, gee, what is that going to do? I'm going to add one more parameter in here, and I'm just going to call this my slope. I can get my fingers in the right key. So now I can come in here and say, gee, maybe I've got a 1/2 inch per foot slope. Well, the run is a report, so to figure out what that offset should be, I want to do the rise divided by the run, right? So the offset value is normally rise divided by run. Well, this is my rise, this is my run. So basically, I'm going to say take the slope and multiply it times the run. Now in Revit, whenever we do this, a lot of times, for those of you who haven't dealt with it, it gives you an inconsistent units. So if you divide one of those by 1, it will report back the units. So you're going to see now, if I come in here and say, gee, I only wanted a 1/4 inch per slope foot, got the inch mark there, it's updating that offset as we go through. If I come through here and start changing the run, all of that information is going to be updating. So now I've got a little bit more intelligence embedded into this where I can give it the rise, I can give it the run, and have this start to work. Right? So maybe you're like, oh, okay, there we go. Is this point going to be higher than those points? We could build some conditions into that with more formulas. But I'm not going to go there today. So the other thing that's great about this is I got that rise divided by run, but what you have inside of the nested or inside of adaptive points in the families themselves also translates through into the properties or into a project as well. So what I love about this is when you select an adaptive component point, and again, I'm in the project, there are some different rules on how these are being measured. So if I host an adaptive point onto a line or a regular point onto a line, it can say, hey, is it figuring out the normalized curve parameters? Do you want to figure out if I'm on a curve, the segment length or the chord length between adaptive points? What I love about this is you can also just say, hey, I want to know the segment length. So right now I can tell you from the beginning of the valley of this roof, I place this 11'6" and 51/128 of an inch away. So if I really wanted to say, hey, I want that to be 12 feet away, I can get this, and as I start playing with these values, you're going to see that it's moving that point back and forth. So I can become really, really accurate with where this is going. I can even come in here and say, hey, I want that to be a 0 segment, so now it's going all the way out to the end there. You can also change it from the beginning, so you can see it's considering this edge over here at the beginning, or I can change it to be to the end, so now it's 38'6" from this end. So depending on how you set that, you can change it.
Bless you.
Excuse me.
That will be recorded forever.
So it's kind of nice. I don't really care where I'm putting these points. Same kind of thing would be happening here. Well, gee, if those were equal runs, maybe I want to come in here and say, well, you know, I'm going to do a segment length on this. And on that segment length, maybe I want it to be 20 feet from the edge. So now I'm 20 feet down. Oops, my bad. I was thinking I wanted to be 20 feet the other direction. So now I know from this inside corner out, I'm 20 feet. I can do the same thing over here on this point and say, okay, we'll change this to be a segment length. We'll make it 20 feet. And it's from the beginning. That's all working nice and fine. So you really have control over these when you lay them into the project, not just of, hey, it's an arbitrary point where you clicked. You can really start getting into those segment lengths and changing it. Again, as you saw, I embedded into that. If I grab it, I can say, oh, gee, this was going to have a 1/2 inch per foot slope. I changed the value. You can see I've just adjusted that ridge. It's going up, doing what it needs to do. What I really love about this as well is since this is adaptive and these are points, if I come in here and edit the footprint of this and decide that, you know what, maybe on this one side I'm being 1/8 of an inch per foot, I change it to be 1/8 of an inch per foot slope, and you can see it's reporting 1/8 over here. Here it says 0. Does anybody understand that that's actually a units calculation? So for whatever reason, the out-of-the-box template, the units are rounded to the nearest 1/2 of an inch. It's kind of like the old AutoCAD fillet radius of a 1/2 of an inch. Kind of crept into the Revit. So if I go change my accuracy, now you'll see it's at 1/8 of an inch. So I've got 1/8 of an inch per slope here. I've got the 1/2 of an inch. I forgot my negative, so Revit's going to tell me it can't do this. But what the beauty of this is, if I go finish this, a regen failure. Ooh. Let's try that again. Let's, 1/8 of an inch. I've done this 100 times in my life. So we're -1/2 here. That's just going to make this 1/4. We'll try that. Okay, there we go. What's beautiful about this is as it starts going in and developing, I change the slope since these adaptive points are hosted on the edges of this roof from the beginning and end segments. It automatically moved with it. So I don't have to sit here and, oh man, I've got to go recontrol that cricket. I've got to go redo what I wanted to do. And even if I had done this as a flat roof with modifying the sub-elements and figuring out the heights of what those needed to be, great, but it's not going to move as I start changing the slopes, etc. So it's a really great tool to start coming in and understanding how you need to get this generated and what you need to do here. So that's one great real-world example of using adaptive components. You'll also see that the same thing I had with the points here. If I come back and look at the point here, since this point is hosted up on the wall, I must not have got it hosted on the wall correctly because I'm not getting the same property I had for my other adaptive points. So I knew I was having issues with that one when I placed it because it's still allowing me to break what's going on there. Yeah, oh, I hosted it to the face of the wall, I think is what my problem was. But had I hosted that one correctly, I might have to go back and redo it, I would have had the same properties for those points, for segment length, etc., as long as it's hosted to the object and what's going on there. So it's one of those nice features that you have those available to you loading it into the project. That's one of the things I don't think a lot of people know you can do there. So that's one real-world example of adaptive components. There's quite a few out there. I know somebody else has been talking about, and I've done it as well, getting into and doing adaptive components for travel distances. So if you get into a travel distance and you want to calculate the overall total of that, I believe I've talked about that in my blog. I can't remember if I blogged that one or not. I've also talked about that in, I forget what it is. It's Kelvin Tam just did it too for doing a thing on values for that as well. So a lot of values for those and getting in there. One of the things that I like to show is in my blog, and I talked about this, and we'll get into this a little bit, is creating an adaptive component for slab edges. So I don't know if anybody's ever tried to do a slab edge. Slab edges will only go on flat slabs. So if you are doing a slab that's going to be going up and down or warped or anything like that, the slab edges will only stay horizontal, so we can't really do those inside of there. So one of the tools that I got into for adaptive was basically the same thing you just saw me do, but I added a sweep to it. So we'll go ahead and do that family. If you get lost, it is in my blog. So I'm going to come back and do another new family. We'll do another generic model adaptive. Now I'm going to go set some reference points up, and I'm just going to go ahead and probably do something simple for now with like 6 points. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, and then again, I'm going to go through and start doing reference lines from point to point. 3D snapping turned on. I'm going to need my chain, and I'm going to go do a reference line from point to point to point to point to point to point. Now I also realized that I forgot to go in there and make all of those points adaptive, so I'm just going to go select that, go grab just my reference points for right now, and make those adaptive. So again, it doesn't matter when you make the points adaptive, you just need to make sure at some point in time you have those adaptive points so you can go through and pick those. So now that I've got that done, one of the tools that I like to do is just host reference points on lines to give myself other work planes. So if I come in here and host this adaptive point onto this line, kind of like what you saw in the beginning, I can come through here and say it's a curve parameter, it's a non-rationalized, it's a segment length. I can kind of do those same tools you saw in there. But you'll also notice with normal points that when you select them, they only display the work planes that are associated to them when they're selected. Well, that's actually because it says in your graphics property, only show the work planes when selected. I like to always see those, so I'm going to come up here and say always show my work planes. Then you're going to notice it's only giving me the one work plane of the perpendicular to the associated host. But again, if you grab that plane, you can also come down here and uncheck show normal references, and it'll look more like an adaptive point where it's giving me all of the work planes that are there. So you do have multiple options in those points to say, hey, I want to see all of them. I only want to see the normal ones. Then in that case, now that I've got those adaptive points there, what I can do is start using the reference point that I placed to determine what I'm doing inside of my shape there. So hold on, I just had issues with my mouse freak out my object here. Go back into, sorry, I had some technical difficulties there. Go back into this. So now that that point's there, what I can do is I can either draw an element on that point, or I can have the availability to use that as a work plane. So I'm just going to use it as a work plane. I could parameterize this and bring in a profile, which I think we'll get into in the next session. We might have some time for it in this session. What I'm going to do is I'm going to have that reference point selected, and now I'm just going to come in here and start basically drawing model lines the shape I want that to be. It's associated to my reference plane, my reference point. It's telling me. I might want to try to get into a little bit different of a view. I don't want 3D snapping turned on. Let me try this one more time. Model lines, select the reference point, go and grab model lines, although this time I don't want 3D snapping on because I want to be able to get my orthogonal or my alignment line set up. So we'll just come down here. We'll just basically set this up. Pretty basic and simple. I'm not going to be that critical on it. I'll come down here and draw another point going down, and then I'm just going to trim these points together. Okay, so I just use that point to give myself a work plane to draw the shape that I wanted. And if I get a little bit more associated to the side, you're going to see it's extremely large. I could parameterize that if I wanted to, but an extremely large profile or thickened slab. So if I select that, and then I select all those reference lines, now I can go ahead and say create form, and it's going to basically create that and sweep it along the path. So I'll go through, set that up, it'll be swept along the path, and it's all going to be looking pretty good, doing what I want it to do. you can still see that that form or that original shape is still inside of here. And if I want to kind of see a little bit better, similar to what I showed you in the X-ray mode in the past, I can go into X-ray mode so I can see what's going on with that whole object, see what's going on inside of there. So now that that's created, it's a 6-point family. I'm going to go ahead and load this into my project. I'm going to go ahead and create a floor and break it a little bit. So we'll just go in here and create a floor. We'll just draw some lines. Probably should have created it as more than a 6-point family, but that's okay. So I'm going to go ahead and just finish this floor, but one thing that I want to show you on the floor is if I start coming here and doing my modify sub-elements, and let's just say I wanted to take this whole edge and we'll move this edge up a distance, that when I go to do slab edges on this floor, Revit will probably let me do this slab edge, but it's not going to let me do any of these side slab edges. So I'll go ahead and do my slab edge, and I'll go ahead and say I want to pick, let's undo that, I'll pick the bottom edge here. It doesn't even let me pick the bottom edge on this side. So the problem with the slab edge is if you're really trying to do that slab edge and you have a warping or sloping slab, Revit doesn't do it. So this is where my family is going to come into play. And I think right now I just have this generic model. Now what I can do is, this is a 6-point family, I can just go ahead and pick 3. One thing I don't like about doing pick point families, you can't really pick a pivot point while you're in the family. So we'll cruise around to this, go to my inside point over here. I should have isolated this before I started this. So it's not a 6-point family, but you guys will get the gist. So now I can come through here and start doing that, and it's going to go up and down and around and miter nicely around the corners for what I'm doing inside of there. So part of the problem could be the way I drew this. It could also be the fact that this is probably not set to be vertical on placement, etc., etc. It's actually picking up on the slopes of the slab. So if you've got that rotated backwards, it might be the properties of the adaptive point, or you might need to draw that rotation value or your shape the other direction. So let's go back into that family and let's grab all of the adaptive points. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to go to my filter. So we'll grab all the adaptive points. We'll come into the adaptive points, and again, we have those rules. Is what is it by host reference? Is it vertical? Is it orthogonal on placement? Let's go ahead and say orthogonal. Let's reload it into the project. I didn't think orthogonal was the one I wanted, actually. Let me try that again. Might have actually done that profile the wrong direction. I haven't done this family in a while. That's how you know it's live. Yep, see? I should have drawn that the other direction because it's not fixing it. But you would get the point. I could go rotate my profile around, resweep it. But that's another nice tip about what you can do inside with adaptive components. I see a lot of people getting inside of there, creating this stuff, but not understanding, hey, it can still be an adaptive component. So the other type of adaptive components I did want to start talking about were going to be panel-based families. So what a panel-based family is really going to be used for, and I'm going to close out of some of these families. So if I really want to start doing a panel-based family, what I'm going to want to do is getting into creating this scenario. So what a panel-based family is originally used for, I'm going to go ahead and open up just one of my files. So like I might have this tower here, and inside of Revit, when you grab a surface in the conceptual massing environment, I can divide that surface up. Once that surface has been divided, I can then start choosing different patterns to put on side of here. If I happen to have created a generic model that was going to be point-based, you'll see that I can come in here and start creating this component that will associate to the face of that host. So if I start dividing the surface, I can set this up with like a space frame truss. Terrible example here. But what's cool about that is I can also not just take that space frame and put it on a scenario. I'll be able to click and place my 4 points and put that space frame object anywhere into a model. So you can see it doesn't necessarily have to be associated to a face or to a surface. It's still basically an adaptive component. So how we can start getting into that is we'll go create a new family. And we're going to do a generic model this time, but we're going to do what's called face-based. No, I'm sorry, pattern-based. So I'm going to do a generic model pattern-based family. And you're going to see there are all the different patterns we have inside of here. So it looks very similar to what I did. I've got the 4 adaptive points. They're all labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. Very similar to what I did, but the difference with this is it's already got some pre-baked rules into it. So if I grab the grid you see here, I can actually change it to be one of those different types of grids that you're going to be assigning to the project environment.
Real quick, if you've got just a second, Tony asks, when you reloaded the parentheses previous family, did you need to overwrite parameters since you changed a parameter?
I didn't actually change a parameter. I changed the definition of the adaptive point. So I didn't need to hit reload. That's not why it wasn't posting. It was all going vertical. I actually picked on the vertical side of the object. Since I went through and changed the definition, that's not a parameter, so it's not going to make a difference if I do that. But good question and good catch. So you've got these different options inside of here. So if you want to go to like a triangular bent, you're going to see I've got the different pattern there. It's going to give you some different options. So gee, doesn't that pretty much look extremely similar to what I did for the roof parapet? So now I can come back and you'll see there's a lot of different options just depending on what you might want to do in there. Here's a rhomboid version, which is basically square, but it's just going a little bit different. And a lot of these will be different rules and scenarios and settings for when you are loading these to a current panel adaptive. I'm just going to go back to the rectangular version. So we'll just come up here to the rectangle, and we'll make this pretty simple. So one of the things that's great about a component like this is we have the capability to come through now, and a lot of the reference planes, etc., things are already set up for me, so I don't have to go put those 4 points in there. I don't have to do this. What I'm going to do on this one is just simply do a reference point again. Now I'm going to go ahead and host this on one of the reference lines. Again, I like that to be visible all the time, so I'm just going to say always. And now that I've got this here, I'm just going to simply select it. I'm going to go ahead and draw a model circle on that point. I'm going to put it in here. And in this case, I'm just going to select that, and I'm going to parameterize the radius. So I'm going to make that radius dimension permanent. I'm going to add a label to that. I'm going to call this one my radius. We'll make it type-based, and now that's parameterized. Okay? So now what I'm going to do is select circle, select the paths, and just say create form. And now you can see I've got this nice, beautiful adaptive component here, or excuse me, panel-based component that I can go through and set this up. Since I parameterized the radius, I should be able to come in here and say, gee, I only wanted that 6 inches. Hit the OK button, and it starts to go through and adjust. So great little tool. I've got this set up. I'm going to go ahead and load this back into that little round tower file. So what's great is now that that's been created, I can simply take this surface, and instead of having the space frame, did I not get it loaded in here? It's family 4. Man, it's not showing up. What did I do wrong? Pattern-based, it's on this. I wonder if that's because that's an old 2010 upgraded. Interesting. Maybe I need to start with an out of the box one because I am not seeing my family 4 inside of here. Okay, let's go create a new mask real quick and we'll do this all over because I don't know what I did wrong. So we'll go ahead and create a simple circle. It's not going to be as fancy as the other one, but we'll come through here and we'll create a form. We'll create a cylinder. Let's raise it up a little bit. Let's grab one of the surfaces and divide the surface. And then let's go ahead and load that into that project. Now let's see if we get that inside of here. I don't know why I didn't load in the other one. Really bizarre. So now you can see I went through there and I've taken that in, I've hit that adaptive, I've adjusted it, boom, it went through and set it up. So what's great about that is if it's divided, I can come in here and start changing the U value, the V value, whatever I'm going to look at, change the spacing on it, and you're going to see I'm really going to start being able to come in here and update that file. So just by going in, changing the U value or changing the V value, change the spacing inside of here, and that's my curtain panel adaptive. One other thing that we can start doing with that is I'm going to come over here and divide this surface as well, is even though I have that and it's made to be going onto the surface, I'm going to grab the surface, not the whole mass. It gets confusing when you have all of those lines inside of there. So I can still take that family and drag it and drop it, and I can still choose to place it on this surface. Now, one of the key things on this, and I think I talked about this in the massing last month, is when I have this surface divided over here, if I select it, there's a secret hidden little down arrow up here for how do you want to display that surface representation. I want to display the nodes so I can actually take things and snap things to that. So I'm going to come in here and talk about those nodes, and I'm going to go drag and drop this in here, and now I can actually host this maybe diagonally onto these nodes that are inside of here. So rather than actually going through and setting that up, and I did it in the wrong pattern, although that's kind of cool, I can go through and host that node going inside of there. So as long as I have those with nodes, it's the same family, but it's going to allow me to come through here and do what I wanted to do possibly differently by hosting it rather than setting it up and doing the craziness. So it's still, even though it's pattern-based, will still allow me to go through and set it up. The other thing that's nice about this is then I can go ahead and in this file say I want to go ahead and repeat it on there. So since I went through and did it at an angle like that, I have the array command. I did that kind of quick, I'll redo it. I can select it, and the array command in the massing environment turns into a repeater command. So I can go up here and say repeat it, and since I hosted it on points on this face, it's now going to go through and host those on the points on that face as well. Same thing can happen if I come in here and grab this and change the U and the V values. It should also repeat going around as we start getting into this and setting it up. So kind of getting into those adaptive components and using those inside of the project environment. But again, I'm doing this in the mass. So if I go ahead and load this into my project environment, I can still go in here and start placing that family. So it's still point-based. I don't know, let's say we wanted to do one from this over to this. Oh, what the heck, let's throw it in the midpoint here somewhere, and let's host it up here as well. So taking that tube frame construction, now I can really start to break this down, getting into more objects, start playing with those objects. And again, those points are hosted onto that object. So if I grab that point, it's, you know, I want it in the middle. I didn't snap to the midpoint. I can change its rationalization to be halfway through the middle. So hey, as opposed to being at 0.5, let's move it 3/4 of the way through the middle. Or no, let's move it at 1/4 of the way through the middle. You still have the properties of that in the project environment on how you want to be massing it. So I've had clients start coming in and using this for lintels. I've got a window inside of there. I want to go ahead and do a lintel, or maybe I've got this crazy arching weird shaped roof. I'm going to create a component that looks like a structural framing member for, you know, the SD phase, and I can just start snapping it to those points, bringing it around. Really some great tools to allow us to start using those adaptive components. So some great tools, ways to do it, and again, it's all hosted on that. So if I go back and reset the shape, I wasn't expecting it to lose all of those. So I was going to say is if I come in here and modify some sub-elements, and let's take this one that was 4'6" and move it up to 8 foot, everything's adjusting with it. If I decide to take this one point over here, I can get the point. Anyway, I keep seeing a highlight, but it's not letting me click it. There we go. Maybe say I wanted this one only be 6 feet up. Again, as I start changing it, those adaptive components are hosted and it all moves and goes with it. So there's a lot of different scenarios where you can start thinking about these. So just keep them in the back of your mind. Gee, maybe I can go put some windows in. I've got 1 or 2 windows with a lintel in there or some sort of crazy stone contraption above it. You might be able to do that with some sort of adaptive component or panelized system.
Yeah, because I know I always like a window in a floor slab.
Well, you know what I'm doing there. So it's one of those things, too, and with the 4 pick points, if it's a window with a different lintel and a different sill, as long as you've got pick points on there, you could just pick the 4 edges of the window. If it's a 1 or 2 off scenario, and not every window, and go through and just host it in there.
So any questions, folks?
We're expecting to get a few questions as we went through. I don't know if anybody has any comments, questions. Hey, could you use it in this type of environment or this process?
This is a very powerful system, but it's also a system that is not necessarily, easy to think, or once you get into it, it's easy to think about, but when you're first learning it, it's like, it's a kind of a whole new learning process, really, of what can we do with this? How can we accomplish something? How can we reuse and repeat and tie things together? So it's kind of complex.
Yeah, and the big part of it is like Stan said, trying to get an understanding inside of the family that, wow, I really, really need to pay attention to my work planes. I really need to, I thought I had the other one open still. I really need to make sure that if I'm doing my own reference points, how can I do those reference points? How can I get those set up? And on the next one we get into, we'll get a little bit more in depth and start creating reactors and things like that. So just to kind of let you guys see what I'm talking about here. This is a terrible example of this, but I've got these nice little bubble tower, as I like to call it. So I've got these little reactive circle components inside of here. And what I can do with these circle components is this little point right here, I've got what are called a reactor or a definition to that. So all of these circles are going to react to this point. So if I take this point and move it out, you'll be able to see that once Revit processes this, all those bubbles are going to get bigger or smaller depending on how far away or close to that reaction point they are. So a lot of different scenarios on being able to do this. Also with the adaptive components, and this is kind of my little play tower I'll show you when I hide these bubbles, I've created adaptive components that can actually give me lengths of each side, how far out of bin they are, etc., to really come in and start saying, hey, how am I going to do this? What can I get set up with this? So,
all right, so
a little bit crazy, but you can see those balls definitely got bigger. I can't see through the middle here anymore. So definitely a different philosophy on doing it. And while we're answering these next questions, I'll go ahead and just like move this really close and it'll be more apparent.
All right, so Kay does have a question. If you would like curves between the adaptive points rather than reference lines, can that work?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. So I'll show you here in 1 second. I've actually got a 49-point pick panel that I've created because I had a client who really wanted to make sure that this panelized system going actually on the outside shape of this tower, my bubble tower, with real panels is what is going to happen with this, how is the curve going to be. Since I'm on compound curves, is it truly going to be a curve, is it going to be a spline? Because I originally created it with just 3 points, but I could create it with 49. So you can see it's reactive if I move that point. So you can use this for like sunshades, kind of move have the parameter that moves that reaction point around for where the sun would be with azimuth and altitude. And as it does it, you can have it change locations of sunshades, etc. But to answer Kay's question, I think I have it inside of here, yeah. So I've got this panel system inside of here like this, and what I've done is this is actually curved. So if I go edit this family, what you'll see is I still put adaptive points in there, but rather than drawing what's called a reference line through here, I did what's called a spline through points. So I still did my reference points like I did anywhere else, but what I did is I then selected those points, don't want that point above, and with those points selected, I came down here and said, hey, give me a spline through points. And a spline through 3 points is going to be a curve. So that's basically what I did on this panel. Here's all my different points. I did a spline through points. I'm just going to hide my surface here. I did a spline through those points, and then I just took basically this spline, and this spline, and said, hey, create a form. So now I've got this total wavy, crazy panel system that I could go in, place this in there, and really start to see what's going on. You'll also see inside of this that not only did I do that, I drew a reference line, straight across, and now I can measure the difference between the two. So as this starts to get into play, I can measure my height distance from this to this and really start to see how great of a deformation I have in that panel. So if I go back into my bubble tower and I pick on this panel, not only is it truly curving in 2 directions on this, right, it's curving around that way and the shape curves up, I can pick in there and I can give you how far it's deforming at each corner, or not each corner, at each center point. So now I can come through here and say, hey, look at that. It's going through up here, down there, etc. And I can say, hey, between points 1 and 3, at deformation point 2, it's 1 foot 10. And at deformation point 4, it's 2 foot 3, etc., etc. So you can really start to see as the curve changes, it's going to be set up. And again, it's just that same family that if I just basically come in here and click this, I can start clicking on any points inside of here to start getting this set up. I don't know. I'm going to try to do this in a way that makes sense, but it's hard to tell with these bubbles. So boom, boom, boom. I basically just put that panel in there, and now I can start again to see the reference points. So along those same lines on this file, my client was like, okay, I want more points in there, and I really want to start determining that. So one of the things we had done, I don't have this out of here. Let's go ahead and open this. So one of the things I had also done inside of here is created, wrong year. Let's go up to my 2013 families. So inside of here, I've created basically a 49-point panel for this. We were 3D printing, verifying things were going to happen. So if you really kind of zoom in here and look at this, I've got all these different points. There's 49 of them with the same offset value you saw. But as I take each one of those points and start playing with it, you can see that the panel is going to start going up and down and dropping around and doing what it needs to do. So depending on what I do with that, really going to start to play with that sweep and curve.
Maximilian, hopefully that answers your question right there. Can you have more than one reactor point?
Absolutely. So the way that was done is, so if I go back to, let me close out of this point, new, let's go back to my bubble tower. So if I go to my little sphere, what happens on this family is this family similar to like what you saw me do with the sloping roof, and we'll get into this in the next webcast, but I put a value here, and this value is a reporting parameter just like I did in the Cricut family I kind of showed. But inside this family, then I just basically said, hey, take the radius of the sphere and just divide it by a value. I could change the value. I could put another parameter in there for that if I wanted to. But what I did then is inside of this bubble tower here, I've got that one, if I can find that adaptive point that's now floating somewhere else, space up here. So when I place these files and these bubbles inside of here, and let me just do it again real quick. Let me just delete this half. And delete this half. So when I placed it, I've just got this reactor point here. So I just went and placed a little sphere report, and the first point is hosted on the object. The second point is hosted to backwards. See, I haven't used this in a while. So my first point will be hosted there. My second point will be hosted to the node on that surface. So now as this reactor point moves, still getting the wrong point. Sorry, sometimes it's hard to grab it. As I move it, you can see it changes the size of the sphere. Right? So if I wanted more than one reactor point, that's just an adaptive component. So if you look and I grab that, that's just another reference point. So I could come and give myself another reference point somewhere else. I'll go ahead and put it on this vertical grid. And then I could host another one on this point. So if I wanted that one to be to that point, but the next one to be to this point, hey, I could do that as well. Or I could have two adaptive points inside of there and say, hey, take the percentage of the two, et cetera, and really start to go through it and set it up.
So we have a couple minutes left, and we have a couple questions left. Dale asks, can you use the sweep tool within the line adaptive family to create a void cut for creation of a brick ledge?
I think you'd be able to do that just as long as you were in that family. You check cuts with voids when loaded, and then you basically make this rather than a solid a void. And then we'll go ahead and reload this into our project. And then let's just see if we can now say, hey, I want to say cut this by this. And so now I've got some fun little curves inside there. So yeah, as long as it's a void and the cut with void property is set up, I think that would work for you in doing a brick ledge. So great, you're already thinking about ways to use this and to get things set up for yourselves.
That's the trick with some of these webinars, is you see a lot of this stuff and you have to think about how would I use that for something I want to do. So anyway, Carrie asks, once the geometry is created, how well / what options does Revit have to annotate and describe for construction? Which is a good question, because I was wondering how you were going to turn that Cricut into something that could be described for construction as well.
So one of the nice things on that is it's still an object. It can still be dimensioned. So if you really needed to come in here and you want to dimension from there to there, you still have the capability to do that. It also is going to pick up on things like on the Annotate tab. I can do my spot slopes, etc. So I can get the spot slope on that ridge is actually sloping 1/2 of an inch, but over here it's 7/8 and over here it's 5/8 because of the difference. Just depending on what you've got set up, it'll allow you to do that. The other thing that you can do, now that I've closed all of those families, do I have the bubble family open? Gotta have something open, is you can go into your family types and change it to certain categories. So if I didn't want it just to be a generic model, I can actually say, hey, no, this is going to be casework. So you could go through and start doing some crazy pick, and have it do some casework along the lines for you. You can also move it to the door category or the window category. So like I said, if I was doing the one with lintels and sills, I would probably switch them to be the door or window category. So that way when I go through, and it might not let me do it totally here, but when I go through and set it, now it's going to schedule as a window. It's going to be seen as a window. It's going to turn on and off with windows. So just depending on what you're doing, you can change it to some category types, but not all of those once you're done.
Excellent, Brian. Thank you once again for preparing this webinar, and we really appreciate it. It is being recorded, hopefully successfully, and will be on our YouTube site within the next few days. And also you can find it at CAD1.com/events/archives. So it's there. Mr. Mackey is available for consulting around the country and across the globe. So if you'd like, look up BD Mackey Consulting.
Well, if you guys have any other questions that pop into your mind before we get to the next adaptive components, hey, I tried this didn't work, just go to my website, grab contact, shoot me an email. And once you shoot me an email, then maybe I can incorporate that into, I don't know if it's next month or the following month, but the other adaptive component.
And then watch for Revit Radio again on January 10th. That's always a lot of fun way to answer your Revit questions. Thank you very much. Have a great holiday. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, and all of the other things that happened this year. And we will see you next year. Thanks,
everyone.